Hi, I'm Kim Tasso, and as you can see from my ears, today we're going to be talking about active listening skills. I'll be sharing 7 tips with you for how to improve your active listening. But I wanted to start with a couple of stories actually. When I was young, I trained as a volunteer with an emergency helpline to support people who were suffering depression and suicidal feelings. Our job was simply to listen and to befriend people. We weren't supposed to judge and we weren't supposed to give advice, we just listened. Sometimes we'd be on the phone for many hours where the person on the other end really wasn't saying very much, and we just had to listen for really slight changes in, for example, their breathing, or small sounds they would make, or maybe the sound of them crying in bad situations. It was extremely hard to listen and give so much attention, but really powerful, because being there just to listen to people often saved lives. Really powerful stuff, just listening. More recently, I did some training as a counsellor, and again, when we look at therapy, it's not about the psychological models and the knowledge. Many of the great skills you need as a counsellor, the most important one is really listening skills. Often people will report it's in the therapy the first time people have really listened without judgment to what they've said. So why is active listening so hard? Well, here's an interesting little idea. Our brains tend to work about 500 words a minute. We listen at about 150 words a minute, which is the sort of speed people talk at. So that leaves a lot of capacity, 350, for our brains to go off and do other things because they're not fully deployed on the listening activity. So we have to be careful we don't switch off. Research suggests that we only remember between 25% and 50% of what we hear. That's the Dale's cone of experience. So we know that in the vast majority of situations, we're not really paying attention when we're listening. When we're listening to people, a lot of going on in our brains. Subconsciously, we're using perception filters that consider, our models and our view of the world, and those filters are kind of, subconsciously listening out for words and phrases and ideas that support our own, and tend to ignore the things that kind of contradict our own personal models. So, our brains are doing that filtering piece without us really being aware of it. And as people speak, they may use words or phrases or ideas that trigger associations and feelings in us. So when we hear those words, our brains might go off and start, remembering whatever that experience was. So we need to be aware of what our kind of red flag words are and stop ourselves going off and having those kind of private conversations in our head while someone is speaking. And often people are saying one things with their words and another thing with their non-verbal communication or their gestures. So they might be smiling but saying something very sad. So what are we paying attention to? The spoken content or the non-verbal content? What would we do when there isn't that congruence between those two things? As human beings, we know that most interactions involve a two-way exchange. So while this person is speaking, we know that at some point we're going to have to reply. So sometimes our brains will go off and start thinking about what we're going to say next, and then we stop listening to the other person who's talking to us. So why is active listening so important? I mentioned around the helplines and making people feel heard, because it really does show that you care about the person that you're listening to. You're giving them your attention, and it shows that you're interested and that you respect them. And so in many counselling and coaching situations, people really need to feel heard without judgment. And of course, the more you listen, the more they open up. And listening enables you to develop real empathy with the person, because if you listen to what they say and how they say it, you start to get an insight into what they're thinking and feeling, and you start seeing the world from their perspective. So it's a really key communication skill. Empathy is developed with listening, and the more empathy you have and the more you listen, then you start to develop trust. And that's, say the coaching and counselling area is really important. But if you're in a difficult situation where there are disagreements or conflict, often listening is your first important tool, because until you properly listen to what the other person has said and they've expressed their views, then they're not going to listen to any ideas that you might have. So listening is really powerful in kind of mediation and conflict management. And of course, when it comes to when we're trying to persuade people or maybe to sell things, we need to understand them. So we listen to develop empathy, validate their views, and then when we've got that relationship going, then they're more likely to listen to us. So how can we listen more actively? Well, I'm going to start off with this idea: silence. And there's two key reasons for this. Silence, most definitely golden in my view. The first thing is we need to remove distractions. The obvious one is your phone. Put the phone away where you can't see it, and make sure there's no kind of ambient noise of people around you, so then you can really hear. The other reason silence is really important is because if you remain silent, perhaps with a smile, people don't like silences and they would tend to keep talking to fill that void. So silence is really powerful in listening. And of course, with COVID times, we need to make sure we haven't got all the stuff going on at home, dogs barking, doors ringing, because that kind of interrupts our silence. So silence really important. The second part is really around non-verbal communication. So we need to make sure we maintain eye contact to show we're really looking at and listening to what the person is saying, and also adopt the right posture, fairly open, perhaps lean forward a little, so that you show with your body that you're listening, and maybe the occasional nod of a head to show that you are listening and the person can carry on. Thirdly, you need to really concentrate and be in the moment. Our lives are so busy and our brains are running through with ideas about what's happening. Oh, just knocked my ears off. What's happening and what you're going to be doing next. So you have to stop all that and focus on being absolutely in the moment right now, and what they are saying and how they're saying it. Sometimes it helps to think about what can I learn from listening to this person, so then you're really paying attention to something new. Some people talk about the 3 A's: attention, attitude, and adjustment. Okay, so I'm going to use a prop here. I have a parrot. Naturally, it's a red parrot. And there are numerous ways to show you are listening, and also to check your understanding. Parroting back or repeating back exactly what the person has said is one way. And of course, it can be used, but it can take a lot of time as well if you're repeating back exactly what people said. But this idea of reflecting back what people have said is really important to show that you are listening. Another way to do that is to back to parrots, paraphrase. So you might reflect back what you've heard, but using your own words. And I have another para, which is paralinguistics, where you might use, not particularly words to communicate, but you might say and noises that show you're listening. They're not words, but it doesn't actually continue the person to carry on speaking. Some people ask me about taking notes when they're listening to people, and of course that's really good most of the time. But when you first start listening to people, we try and give them what therapists call free attention. We don't do the notes. We absolutely concentrate on the person who's speaking to us. And then a final technique is around summarising. So rather than repeating back what you've heard or paraphrasing back, we listen to everything the person says, and then we try to summarise what we've heard back in our own words. This checks our understanding. It gives the person speaking an opportunity to correct, and they often hearing what they've said for the first time from someone else's perspective, really powerful. And it also means that you're kind of, in some respects, focusing or prioritizing their thoughts, because in your summary you can apply what you see as the most critical areas. Okay, so I've been speaking for about 7 minutes now. Did you continue to listen carefully all the time? Were you distracted? Did you look at your phone? How could you repeat back or summarize the key points that I've just been through? How easy would you find that to do? Anyway, thank you very much for watching and, of course, listening today. Hope to see you soon. Bye.